Like I said, there are a lot, but I think what we want to try and do is kind of zoom in on the figure of Jesus. Because it's amazing to me how as we study even the Gospels, it's so easy to kind of lose sight of him. Like you take a step back and you see the people around him, and that's not a bad thing, but just that part of our study, like I've said in the past, is to really try and open up the doors to encounter Jesus, to help you see him better, and to give you a sense of seeking him and finding him in the text of the Scriptures. So today we begin. Jesus is on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. Where is he? What is he close to when the section begins? The end of chapter 4. He's close to Capernaum. And where is he going? To the territory of the Gentiles, yeah. So if you look at your map really fast, you'll see that Capernaum is kind of on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee. It's west a little bit. He sails from there kind of across the sea toward the eastern shore. This area now is called the Golan Heights. It's occupied by Israel, and it's very hilly, like right on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. It goes up, I think, 1,000 or 1,500 feet. Like you look and you're like, oh, those would be large. Not the easiest climb. So he sails over there, and that's going to be an important part of this chapter. But like I've said before, we also want to try and get a sense of asking that question first. Where is he? Where is he going? Because this chapter is going to show us something that is of fundamental importance for the gospel. We've talked about it before, but we'll get there in a second. So Jesus is sailing across on the Sea of Galilee, and this storm brews. Now, one thing that I noticed is it says he departed like immediately, just as he was. Mary Healy in her commentary points out it makes it sound like Jesus was teaching the people from the boat and then they just sailed away. Or they rowed, they probably had oars. But that they didn't go back to the shore, they didn't get ready for the trip. Jesus just says, okay, we're going across the sea. Now, if you're disciples, what would you do? Oh boy. She wants out of the boat right away. Right? But if you're disciples, what would you do? Yeah, how much clothing did you bring into the boat? You just thought Jesus was going to teach there, right? You don't have food for the journey, you don't have extra clothes, and Jesus is like, oh, we're going. So there's probably already some tension in the story as it gets started. Right? And then, this is even crazier. What happens to Jesus? That's probably putting it mildly. He passes out. He's like gone. He's tired. Do you know how we know that? Because he doesn't wake up when the boat is flooding. Right? For you to actually sleep through that just as a normal human person, it'd be like sleeping through a car accident. Does that happen? No. You wake up as soon as the car slows down. Right? As soon as you get to the first stoplight or the first stop sign in town, or you get on the off-ramp off the interstate, if you're riding with someone else, that's when you wake up. Jesus is still asleep. He was tired. Right? He's been teaching probably all day, or maybe for several days. So he's asleep in the boat. And there's this storm that brews on the Sea of Galilee. Now, the Sea of Galilee isn't huge, and this is why I started to get a lot more suspicious of these in the Gospels. Because they say the wind can be heavy in the Sea of Galilee, that it kind of channels between the hills, and storms can happen on it. But it's hard for me to imagine a storm on a body of water that size with waves large enough that people who have fished all their lives think that their boat is capsizing. I mean, right? Like if you put all these pieces together, lots of you have been to, or maybe you have a lake home in Minnesota. Most of those lakes are a bit smaller than the Sea of Galilee, but some of the big ones aren't. And there can be days of really heavy surf, right, where the waves are kind of roaring and crashing into the shore. But even then, are you really worried about boats capsizing? I mean, it's not a lot of fun to be on the water, but if you're an experienced boater, like that's not the danger that it would be, right? So I've puzzled over this for a long time, but I think part of it is because this is an image from somewhere else. This comes from somewhere else. There is an image of Jesus that I think is at work in this story. And let's see if anyone can guess what it is. You have to stretch all the way. Well, what is the miracle that he's going to do? He calms the storm on the sea. So what is that showing? He has power over the environment. What if we used a different word? What if we said he has power over creation? Then where would it come from? The book of Genesis. What's the very first thing at the beginning of the book of Genesis? This is actually surprising for a lot of us. There's a spirit hovering over the primordial waters. Creation hasn't happened yet. And it talks about the Spirit of God over the waters. And it's using waters kind of as a metaphor, like waters for the empty space, waters for the chaotic forces outside of God, whatever it is. But it seems to me that this is an image of Jesus as the Lord of creation. At the end of this whole sequence of miracles, right before Jesus reveals himself to Peter and the apostles, and Peter says, "You are the Christ," and Jesus is going to go to Jerusalem. Right before that, there's another miracle that he does on the Sea of Galilee. Anyone want to guess what it is? Yes. Very good. He walks on the water, and there's another storm, and the disciples think they're dying again, and he calms the storm. So I think part of this is Jesus as the Lord of creation. Jesus in a sign, or the gospel is putting Jesus in the midst of this scene, sort of like the Spirit hovering over the waters. Jesus isn't bothered by the chaos around him. The disciples think that they're actually dying. You know, and I think you have to, in a sense, feel a bit of the narrative tension of the story to make sense out of this, right? It's like, oh, well, yeah, Jesus is asleep in the boat, and the disciples are worried. It's like, you know, scratch that. How many of you have been in a severe thunderstorm? You know, where you're worried about, like, the wind ripping the roof off your house? How many of you are like, oh, I'm just going to go take a nap? You know, if you have a basement and it's pouring rain outside and you know that, especially in this region, there's a danger of flood, you're like, oh, well, it'll be okay. I'm just going to, you know, lay here on my couch and I'm going to be completely peaceful. Does anyone actually do that? No. That's not, so you have to feel a little bit the tension, because the disciples are probably right. If the boats are actually capsizing, this is bad. You don't survive capsized boats very easily, right? Especially on a sea with the waves roaring like that. And then there's Jesus. So you see this contrast. People who are terrified for their lives, and Jesus who is completely calm, and he's like, oh, why are you worried? Now note, it's obvious what they're worried about, right? The disciples would be like, Jesus, this is what we are worried about. See that wave? Crash. There's water here. The boat is sinking. So you have to sort of, I think, learn to put the stories back as stories and not just go past them. Because once you see that narrative tension, note who emerges. Jesus isn't worried. That's why the artist painted the picture the way he did. You see, so you have this image of the apostles who are concerned about this storm happening in the world, and the waves are overwhelming them, and there's no way through this, and Jesus isn't worried. Then you stop and think about it, like the modern world and something like coronavirus. You have this chaotic storm in the world, and fear and challenges, and waves are overwhelming the boat, and it's like, Jesus, where are you? It's the same kind of story. You see, there's a genius to the Scriptures that's like this. That somehow, even though it's written 2,000 years ago, it's like we've been in the same spot for 8 months or 10 months. Chaotic and tossed by the waves of the storm and different things. And Jesus is asleep in the boat. So you see, like, once the story is what it is, all of a sudden Jesus sort of roars to the surface. Because he is calm and confident and trusting in God. Now, it's not because trust in God is always going to make everything better or fix all the problems that we have instantly. It doesn't. But there's something about his attitude that I think we need to learn from. That it's better to imitate his confidence in the Lord than to imitate the disciples. Because ultimately it's the love of God that's in charge. And the apostles, for all of their fear and all of their worries about the waves, have they accomplished anything? Nope. Not a thing. Whether the boat sinks or not has little to do with them. So there's a kind of profound moment at the work in this story. The apostles probably feel quite abandoned in the midst of the storm. That they probably feel like Jesus has left them alone. Who knows? Why is he sleeping? How can he sleep through this? Does he not care? They're not very well trained yet. They're not very well practiced in this yet. Even if they were, it would probably still be hard. And then there's Jesus with a simple, quiet faith in his Father that God will provide for everything that he needs.
We didn't have TVs in those days to listen to with the COVID.
But you start to see that there is also a certain extent where I think we need to be a bit suspicious of the media and the information that we have. We live in a world that's almost got too much information, that's got too many things. Because if you, for instance, look at the news in North Dakota, we've been enjoying a beautiful winter. We've had a ton of beautiful days. Our hospitals aren't going crazy. Things aren't overwhelmed. I just visited with a person at Sanford last week, and I think they said their patient numbers are way down. And they're pretty relaxed. The doctors all look relaxed. Like, there's a lot of good that's been happening. And sometimes we get caught up in the things of the wider society or what's happening, and I think it's because of television. And that's not all bad, or the news media, but just that it's good to know that it's not always good for us to have the whole story. Sometimes it's better to have the old spiritual wisdom of waking up and smelling the coffee. I talk about that sometimes because it's like, there is a goodness to when you wake up in the morning, not to just re-engage with society right away, but it's like, make a pot of coffee and smell it. Enjoy a muffin. Come to Bible study. Love your spouse. All of a sudden the world looks a lot better than it does when you jump into the media right away. So Jesus sails across the Sea of Galilee. He goes to the territory of the Gerasenes or the Gadarenes or some other unpronounceable Greek name. It's called the region of the Decapolis, which means the 10 cities. They're Gentile cities on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. So he goes there, and this guy with a demon basically runs up to meet him on the shore. Now that's kind of weird. How did he know that he was coming? Right? Like, Jesus doesn't have this big beacon that broadcasts, like, the bat signal, Jesus is coming, he's sailing across the water on the boat, right? He doesn't arrive on a high-speed train and just show up instantly. This guy shows up at the beach shore, and he's come from the tombs. Now, part of that is because there's a spiritual world at work, and whether the man knows it or not, the demon knows that Jesus has come. Light and darkness don't get along together. The darkness is worried. The demon's panicking because this guy is coming and he is going to remove us. The demon might not know that yet, right? But it's kind of like the allegory of Jesus as a strong man. The demon might not understand exactly who Jesus is, but he knows that something is up because this guy is different. So Jesus shows up, this guy shows up, and he comes from the tombs. If you would put it more literally, he comes from the domain of death. Right? He's dwelling among the tombs. And think about that, because it's literal. He's living among the tombs. But how many of you want to make your home in a graveyard? How many of you would be like, oh, this is a lovely place to live. I'm just going to build a little house. It would be very quiet. Right? But the scriptures are being descriptive in more than one way here. Like, Jesus is light. He's coming into the darkness. Jesus is the Lord of life. He's coming into the realm of death. This guy is dead. Not physically dead, but his spiritual life is dead. He's cast out of the community. He's living among the tombs. This is a place that's unclean. He's not able to worship God because this demon has kind of taken over his life. They bind him in chains and he breaks them because the demon is stronger. And all of a sudden, Jesus shows up and the man comes and throws himself down before the Lord. Again, you have to sort of put these pieces together and expand the meaning. This is kind of like playing with the scriptures, kind of like Play-Doh. You have to stretch it and think about it and put yourself in it, because when you do that, the story sort of changes. The flavor of it changes. You see Jesus, who just brought order to the chaotic mess of a storm that was on the Sea of Galilee. And now you have a man where the storm is inside of himself. He's conflicted and caught up. He's challenged. He's broken. He's not able to worship God. All of those things. And it repeats this phrase, from the tombs. This man dwells among the tombs. There's tombs, and lots of them, and more tombs in this story. That's another good thing to notice. It's emphasizing the point that this man lives among the dead. Remember, in the Gospel of John, Jesus talks about how God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And so you see sort of spelled out in miniature in this story the reality of Jesus. That he is going to call this man to life. This is also fascinating because back at the very beginning of the Gospel of Mark, what was the first miracle that Jesus did? He cast out a demon. So here's what I meant earlier when we talk about the scriptures are paradigmatic. They have a paradigm. So first he goes to the Jews and he casts out a demon and he heals people. Now he's going to come over to the Gentile region, and the first thing that he does is he casts out a demon. You see how there's a kind of parallel there? So he probably did this a lot. But this is like a paradigm. This is a pattern that he followed. When he came into a place, he cast out a demon. And then he starts healing people. And then he teaches them. So we had the paradigm with the Jews in Jesus' first day at the end of chapter 1 and into chapter 2. Here we have Jesus going into Gentile territory. And on his first day, he cures a man with a demon. And then something happens that's rather funny. The demons are like, oh shoot, it's time to leave. Because Jesus is a strong man and he's going to throw them out. So they decide that they want to go into the pigs. Now, like, pigs aren't nice creatures. They're not the kinds of things like, oh, well, I want to possess a pig. Really? But they do. They're probably terrified. You know, Jesus is throwing them out. He's reclaiming the man. He's restoring him to worship. He's making him clean. He's going to reach out and touch him and also touch his heart. But there's this kind of weirdness about it. So the demons go into the pigs and the pigs rush down into the sea. What would you think if you were the owner of the pigs? Like, man, this guy shows up and he just killed my entire livelihood. Like, boom. You know, it makes me wonder what Jesus did. Like, did he offer them some money for the pigs that were all dead? And I don't have an answer as to why or what. I can tell you that to a Jewish mind this would make a lot of sense, because pigs are unclean animals, and so demons possessing pigs is like perfectly logical for the Jews. Like, of course they would. They're unclean. God told us so. They're perfect territory for demons. Here the demon tries to say, I know that you're the Son of the Most High. The demon again is right. In the story, he's right. He gets it. But it's probably also a sign of the demon trying to take authority over Jesus. That there was this thing about knowing someone's name and knowing who they were and trying to control them. And in this case, Jesus sort of swats him like a fly. He's not worried. He's not disturbed. He's just calmly saying, unclean spirit, come out of the man. And the spirit is freaking out, right? Like throwing him on the ground and wailing and screaming. And Jesus is just the model of calm. Unclean spirit, come out of him. But then something really strange happens. So the spirit comes out of the man. It goes into the pigs rush into the Sea of Galilee. And now the people are afraid of him. Right? They come out of the town. That's weird. Right? Like if you had a demon-possessed person who no one could bind and you wrapped him in ropes and chains and he ripped them all to shreds, wouldn't you be afraid of the demon-possessed person? Wouldn't that be logical? Like Jesus isn't very scary. He calmly talks to him. And there's such a reversal here. It's just dripping with irony because now that the demon is gone, the people are afraid. What? But that's in the story. Sometimes the best or the reality of what God is doing is afflicting the comfortable. This is an uncomfortable situation. They've kind of learned how all the pieces fit together, and Jesus just changed it. The calculation is different. And now they're afraid. Now they're worried. So I think that's important because something is at work here too, that Jesus is also kind of a long-term planner. So this man, this is one of the strangest stories, I think. Because the man who is cured is sitting with Jesus and clothed in his right mind when the people come out to talk to him, when the people come out of the town. He's still not in the town. This is a Greek area. They're not Jewish. They have many gods, not one God. And they see the man sitting with Jesus in his right mind. Now again, before he lived among the tombs, he was in the realm of death. Now in the story, he's next to Jesus and he's in a place of worship. He's in a place of restored order. Like he's put together. He's not all chaotic and messy. Before, he probably looked like a modern homeless drug user on the street. Right? Matted hair, he lived among the tombs, he's dirty. He looks almost less than human, and now he's restored to life and to worship. In the story, he's physically in the presence of Jesus. You see how that kind of physical position is it's filled with meaning. Before he was physically in the realm of the dead, now he's next to Jesus. Before he was unclothed and nothing could contain him, and now he's sitting clothed and in his right mind. And the difference in the middle of his life, the thing that made the difference is this encounter with Jesus. Right? That's the hinge. It was meeting Jesus that changed everything. You have there this moment of witness as to the impact of Christ. That when he comes, it's like a bomb going off and the entire situation is different. It's not the same. Jesus is the hinge or the hallmark or the fork in the road, and this man chooses to be with him. The people are afraid. They're uncomfortable. Jesus has just rocked the boat and changed the situation. And then the man says, they're leaving. And the man says, let me come with you. And Jesus says, no. That's a fascinating moment. Think about this, because would it not be kind of heartbreaking? You have someone who has radically and powerfully encountered the Lord. He's told lots of people to follow him, to be with him, and he tells this man to stay home. And again, until you can appreciate the tension of that situation, I don't think the story emerges in its meaning. You have to see that this probably broke the heart of Jesus. Why? Because he wants to be with the man. He wants, to continue to restore him to life. This man has experienced a change, but the change isn't complete. It takes a lot of work to be in the right spot, right? Sometimes people where this has happened to. They've encountered the Lord and they've had a great experience and they're ready to change their lives. But it's also a lot of work. Like, yes, you've encountered the Lord. Yes, there's something different. But the work isn't finished instantly. The man was probably on the verge of tears. I can't come with you. Jesus says no. But it's also because he's got a plan. Jesus is thinking longer term. And so what he says is, go home and tell your family what I did. What happens is, Jesus is going to leave, and the next time he sails back across the Sea of Galilee, he's going to meet crowds that welcome him with open arms because of the story of this man. Because he bore witness to Christ. So you see that, in a sense, the gospel is putting him in a place where he follows what Jesus says. He could have ignored it. He could have ran around the lake and met him on the other side, said, nope, I'm coming with you. I'm doing it my way. But he followed the will of God, even though it was hard for him. And in this case, it bore tremendous fruit. There's something powerful about that. And again, you see kind of this openness and this encounter with Jesus that's at the heart of the story. This man, remember how we had the parable of the kinds of soil last week? What kind of soil is the heart of this man? It's probably a bit rocky at the moment. He's had a great experience. The plant has sprung up very, very quickly. Now it's got to take root. And it does. In his life we see it. And we'll see it when Jesus comes back to this territory. But that's not an easy transition. Jesus doesn't always lead people along the easy road. What he asked this man to do would be like getting punched in the gut. And the man does it. The apostles are barely ready to do that. In fact, they whine and complain about it. This man doesn't. So there's these kind of powerful witnesses in these stories. So then Jesus gets in his boat and he sails back across the Sea of Galilee. Where is he going? Probably outside Capernaum. Note, he doesn't go back into town. He stays by the sea. Why does he stay by the sea? The last time he was in the synagogue, what happened? He healed the man with the withered hand, and the leadership of the synagogue plotted to kill him. So he doesn't go back to the synagogue. He's standing on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. He gets out of the boat, and who comes to meet him now? A synagogue official. Think about this. Why would this man come to see Jesus? He's desperate, and his desperation is enough to push him to overcome his reticence and the plotting and the scheming of the synagogue officials. He's decided that it doesn't matter what they think. They think this man is a heretic and a blasphemer, and they're ready to kill him. It doesn't matter what they think. If he can help my daughter, I'm willing to go. So he does. He chooses to come and find the Lord over the opinion of the people around him. Now again, if you think about that, that's saying something. How many things in our world are done because of the impression that we have before other people? How many times do we act to look good in the sight of others or to be esteemed by other people, and really there's something else that should be happening? You see, again, the story just seems to cut right through our hearts and right through our lives. You know, one of the times where I think I see this a lot is people that get jealous of their neighbors based on how long their lawn is. Right? This causes nightmares among neighbors. It's not just a small thing. If their lawn is long and full of weeds, you're ready practically to burn down their house because it's going to impact you. There's a reality to the kind of gospel you start to see, like, wait a minute, this is like right between the eyeballs for us. This is not something that just sort of floats along. This is real. So this man has to overcome all of that to come out to Jesus. And Jesus comes. He asks Jesus to lay his hands on her. Some of you have been in Holy Spirit 101, or you've heard Stella talk, but again, here in the Scriptures is this powerful moment that there's something about touch. There's something about the people who touch Jesus, who physically touch him. They ask him to come and lay his hands on this daughter and she will live. That's a profound statement of faith. I forgot to mention one thing with the man at the tombs. This, again, is a little thing that you could easily miss in the Scriptures in English. But he says that he goes to tell the people what the Lord has done for him. Now remember that little title, Lord, is this loaded word from the Scriptures. We're talking about it because it's the name of God that comes from Old Testament. Where does God reveal his name? At Mount Sinai and the burning bush. The apostles aren't ready to say Jesus is Lord yet, but this man does. We miss that in English, but it's this little key phrase. This man goes and tells people what the Lord, Hokurios, the God of heaven, has done for him. He was probably a Greek and a Gentile. Now he worships one God. So Jesus comes and he has this synagogue official, and he's on his way there. And then, it does this weird thing, and this is, again, you have to sort of be ready for this, Because it's like, so Jesus is on his way to heal the synagogue official's daughter, and what happens?
Another story on the
Right. It's like he never gets anything done. He's like starting something, and all of a sudden in the middle of it, bam, there's this other story. And it's sandwiched in the middle of the story of the healing of this daughter. And it's a woman who has suffered greatly at the hands of doctors. She spent all that she had, and they've given her no help. Luke, who is a doctor, doesn't include those details when he recalls this story. It's kind of funny. Because even today in the modern world, it's like medicine hasn't changed all that much. I mean, in some sense it has, right? But you can still spend a lot of money and sometimes be no closer to answers than you were when you started. But in this story, again, think about this. The faith of the woman is emphasized repeatedly. Faith, faith, faith. Woman, great is your faith. Think about her situation. She's had this problem, I think it says for 18 years. 12 years. 12 years. So she's had this problem for years. It's some kind of bleeding. Bleeding makes you ritually unclean. So she can't go to the synagogue. She can't go to the temple. She's cut off from the community. Not all that different than the man who lived among the tombs. She also, in Judaism, would make other people unclean by touching them, because uncleanness spreads. So she has to overcome all of this, and she's like this persistent bugger. Like, I am going to get close and touch him, because if I do, he's going to heal me. She is radically convicted of the power of Jesus. Much more so than practically anyone else in the gospel. Right? She's like, he doesn't have to look at me. He doesn't have to know who I am. I'm just going to come out and touch him, and I'm going to be healed. She breaks a lot of social conventions to do this. This would be almost unheard of at the time for a woman to come out and touch a man like this. But, again, her heart is fertile soil. The Word of God has taken root. Maybe she's heard him preach before. Maybe she's encountered other people who were healed by Jesus, and she believes that Jesus can do this for her. So she reaches out and touches him. And then, again, this is really odd. Jesus stops and says, "Who touched me?" And it's a bit like, have you ever been in a blob of people? You know, I remember going to midnight mass at St. Peter's when I was a seminarian, and I went over to Italy and we were going to midnight mass. And we were in this line of people. And the Italians have a special kind of intelligence, because for papal events, they give out tickets to anyone who asks. You can get tickets to a Pope's event for anyone who asks, right? You don't have to buy them. But they just give out as many tickets as people ask for, with no regard to how many seats there are. No regard to anything else. They just, okay, you want a ticket? You can have a ticket. Anyone can have a ticket, right? So it's terrifying. Because as an American, you're like, okay, if I got a ticket, I got a seat. And in Italy, it's like, well, if I got a ticket, then I have to be there early because I might get a seat. It doesn't work in my brain, but it somehow is how the Italians operate. So we're waiting in this line, and we went out to the line probably at noon or 10 o'clock in the morning. We had to wait in line all day. It was awful. And these people would cut back and forth, and it was this whole mess. I couldn't tell you how many people touched me that day. It was just a blob of people, and eventually we were all smashed into waiting to get in, and it was awful. You know, that's kind of what happens to Jesus. There's this whole blob of people around him. They're probably yelling at him. Some of them are crying. Some of them are screaming. This man's daughter has died. He's on his way. And this woman touches him and he says, "Who touched me?" It's like the most illogical question he could ask. Everyone touched you. But the story is about a different kind of touch. Jesus feels power go out of him. And there's some debate. Does Jesus know who it is? And I don't know. It feels uncomfortable for me to say exactly yes, because he asked the question. And it's like, if it's in the gospel, it must have been important. So something's going on here. Something in Jesus. Maybe he knows, maybe he doesn't know. I don't think there's a definitive answer that we can give. But it seems like Jesus doesn't use his divine super knowledge all the time. I mean, that's not gospel, but it just seems like it, because there's times where he's surprised by things. If he's God and he knew exactly what was going to happen, how could you be surprised by it? There's just strangeness at work.
Oh, you can. When you're watching a scary movie and you know something bad is coming, but you still get scared.
You can still scream, that's true. But there's a tension in the text that I don't want to hide from. The answers to this aren't easy, and I'm not going to try and sort it out for you and tell you exactly what it means, because I don't know. And that's okay. I'm not an expert in this. It's just kind of like, well, here's what we're given, and this is where things are. So whether Jesus actually knew who it was or didn't know, I wouldn't want to say. But his motive seems to be that he wants the woman to encounter him. He wants to see her. And maybe he wants her to see him. Because the touch isn't enough. It's not just being physically healed. Remember, I've mentioned before that there's a strand in the gospel of the worship that Jesus brings. Of this theme of worship. What is the worship of God? And in this story, I think you see that the worship of God is connected to a relationship with Jesus. She's healed by the touch, but Jesus wants more. Jesus wants her to know him. Not just to know him as a healer, but to know him as one who looked into her eyes. Because something about that gaze, something about this encounter with him is what is transformative in the life of the woman. So I think that's one of the keys to the story, is that he's bringing her to a relationship. He's restoring her to worship. Again, at the heart of this story, if you were to paint it, you have this woman gazing at Jesus. He invites her out. He praises her faith. That's pretty high praise coming from God himself. Be good to be that kind of person, that God would praise your faith. That's a good place to be. And again, there's a contrast, because Jesus is on probably still the shore of the sea. Maybe he's gone into town. There's all this latent tension with the synagogue officials. And yet here on the heart of a common person is the word bearing fruit. The seed has taken root and it's bearing fruit. The fruit of the covenant. She's in a relationship with Jesus. Her life, again, is transformed. She was one way, and meeting him, it's different. And that's something that I think we can cling to. So Jesus, it sort of snaps back to the previous story. Jesus is going to heal this daughter of Jairus, the synagogue official. And he's on his way. The people come to him and say, "Don't trouble the teacher anymore. Don't bother. She died. There's nothing that he can do." And here, Jesus is kind of taking a step forward. Because think about it. There's probably these people. Death is pretty final. When someone's died, you don't, okay, I'm going to go pray for them that they're restored to life. Right? Death is kind of the end of the story, even in the modern world, when we believe in people who rise from the dead. And imagine this father. Like his daughter has died. He's come out to see Jesus. He wanted him to heal her. His quest seems to have been in vain because she's dead. You know, his heart's broken again. He's probably crying. He's probably in tears. Any good father would be at the death of their child, right? And Jesus says, just have faith. That's a call to a pretty radical kind of faith. This, again, is uncomfortable. This isn't just normal. It's like, okay, you're with me, stay with me, don't listen to them, we're going to do something. Just have faith. So Jesus goes, he says that she's sleeping. This is sort of, the early Christians picked this up. In early Christianity, St. Paul talks about it several times, and it shows up in the writings of the church fathers, that someone fell asleep in the Lord. They talk about death as sleeping. He's only sleeping. But in this case, it's a story. This isn't the end of this girl's story. This isn't the end of our story. God is more. There's a life beyond death that's better and bigger. So Jesus invites this father to faith, and he's walking through the town. You know, the man is probably barely clinging to hope at best, right? Like if this was you, you know, it's not an easy thing. Some of you have gone through the death of a spouse, right? It's not an easy moment. Clinging to faith, even faith in the resurrection later, is hard. And Jesus is asking this man to be faithful here and now that he can do something for his daughter. So he calls Peter and James and John, and they go in. The girl's parents are there, and they record his words. And these words are Aramaic. He says, Talitha kum. It's not Hebrew. It's Aramaic. It's probably the language that Jesus spoke most often, particularly in Galilee. Aramaic is a sort of fancy way of saying Old Syrian. Syria, the modern day Syria, this lovely place where there's all these riots and problems and conflict, is in ancient times known as the land of Aram. And the Aram people speak Aramaic. The vowels change a little bit because it's a Semitic language, but that's the language that they spoke. And it was the language that was probably spoken in most of Galilee. But they remembered his words, what he said to her. And again, he takes her by the hand. There's that physical touch. He brings her, he lifts her up. He raises her from the dead, and she rises. All of this language is used by Mark, the exact same words, when Jesus is put in the tomb and when he rises from the dead. The language is the same. Particularly, I think, in the time of the resurrection. And then Jesus says, give her something to eat. This is, again, like the most stunning thing. I mean, could you imagine, like the parents probably just both fainted. The disciples are like, what is this? Because, so think about this. It's been developing. Jesus is the Lord of creation. They're starting to get that. He's master of the storm at sea. Jesus restores the demoniac to worship. He has authority. He is a strong man. He is the king of this world, and he's coming to take authority over these things. Jesus heals the woman. When he arrives back in Capernaum, he has authority over diseases and illnesses. He wants to restore people to a relationship and to worshiping God. And now, as kind of a crowning moment, it's like this crescendo that's been going up, and he raises someone from the dead. I mean, you want a bomb going off. Think about this. This still terrifies me. As a priest, like if you went into a hospital with someone that's been declared dead by the medical people, and like they're really dead, their skin's getting cold, their heart's got no beat, yada, 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 and you pray for them and they come back to life, I think you'd have to put me in the hospital along with the entire medical staff, and you'd have to have someone come pray for me so that my heart doesn't stop, right? That's what just happened, and Jesus says, well, give her something to eat. You know, like if your kid falls down and hurts themselves or skins their knee or something, they might be hungry, but first you wrap them up a little bit and clean them up, and you probably hug them, or if you're worried or they've been lost, it's like you just squeeze them for a while. And Jesus is like, oh, give her something to eat. There's a kind of sort of humanness here and a gentle, considerate love of her. She probably is hungry. But it's also a little bit of comic relief, probably isn't the right phrase, but it's kind of an easing of the tension, right? I mean, like, what would mom and dad do? Think about this. If any of you have lost a child or had a child die, how did you feel? How would you have felt if it was like they came back from something that they shouldn't come back from? They were dead and now they're not. It's just like, oh boy, I'm not sure about this. That would be, and in the modern world, like, think about this. You'd face police investigations, the medical people would freak out. I mean, there would be an endless line of garbage if it happened. Because it's just, this doesn't happen, this isn't, this is weird, they weren't really dead. Every excuse in the book would come out. And the gospel asks, but what if they were? What if they were really dead and came back? Again, it's this fascinating thing. So Jesus is a master even over death itself. Like, it's reaching a crescendo. This is bad. This is part of what provokes a reaction. Later, the Pharisees will say, like, when Jesus comes into Jerusalem, I don't know if it's in the Gospel of Mark, but it definitely shows up in the other Gospels, after the resurrection of Lazarus. What are we going to do? Right? They're at a loss, because if this guy can raise people from the dead, we're done. There's no way you can keep this quiet. There's no way you can put this under a rug. It's just impossible. They're going to make him king. And it worries them. And so there's a nice little chart at the end that just kind of lays out these miracles that we talked about, and shows how the people react, what Jesus is doing. I think these chapters are really exciting. I think when you start to peel back the layers, when you catch some of the narrative tension, when you see what's happening, I think it's really amazing. And I hope that it opens up these stories to you better. It's been really fun because in the daily readings of the Mass, we're in almost the same spot. So it's been great, because it's like there's so much to preach on when I get up there. Someday I'm going to get in trouble at daily Mass, because there's too many things I want to say and lots of things I shouldn't, because it'll take too long. All right, so for next time, we will look at the next chapter in the book, which is most of chapter 6. Thank you to those who brought food. I know that next week is not, I hope it's not the season of Lent yet. Please tell me it's not the season of Lent yet. It's not the season of Lent, Father, right? Thank you. Very good. So I don't think we have people signed up. Does anyone want to volunteer for food? Okay. You'll bring something? Okay. So Mary and Nancy? Vicky. Sorry. Wrong name. I'm getting better. Vicky. Yeah, I knew that too. Darn. Okay, well, Mary and Vicky will bring food for us next week, and who knows, like I said, I wish we had a toaster. We could bring toast. That would be a good thing, but it's hard to toast for like 20 people. Maybe one day we'll figure it out. Who knows? Could use the blower oven or something. Let us pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. In the name of the Father,